Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today and welcome to our session, Tobacco Economics in the Asian Region. Without any further ado, please welcome our chair, Mrs. Maryam Mirza, to open the session. Mrs. Maryam Mirza, the screen is yours.
Hi, welcome everyone to the session. I'll be chairing the session on behalf of Dr. Frank Chaloupka. So I welcome you all to the session titled Tobacco Economics in the Asian Region. We will be presenting the work that the Tobacconomics team has conducted with its partners in the Asian region. And I'd like to just introduce our panelists first. We have Dr. Gumilang. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Economics at Economics University in Indonesia. His research interests are experimental economics, economics of education, and the economics of tobacco control. His current projects investigate the livelihood of current and former tobacco farmers in Indonesia, community-based targeting of government and social program, and distance learning during COVID-19. Our next speaker is Dr. Nguyen. He's the co-founder and chief economist at the Development and Policies Research Center, DEPOCEN, Vietnam. Prior to founding DEPOCEN in 2005, he worked for the Ministry of Industry and Trade and the National Council for Science and Technology Policy. He's also served as an economic advisor to the Economic Committee of the National Assembly of Vietnam from 2008 to 2012. And since 2017, An has led a team of researchers at DEPOCEN working on public health issues, including partnership with UIC on tobacco taxes. Our third speaker is Mr. Wasim Saleem from Social Policy and Development Center. Mr. Saleem has more than 10 years of experience in research and policy analysis and teaching economics. He's a PhD scholar at the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics and is pursuing his research in the areas of macroeconomics impact of tobacco use in Pakistan. His areas of expertise include public finance, microeconomy, urbanization, region, and income accounts of Pakistan. And the last speaker is going to be me. I'm Maryam Mirza. I'm an economist in the Tobacconomics team. My interests include development, tobacco, taxation, and in fiscal policies, anything that's related to health. I'll be presenting my work on poverty in Pakistan and Bangladesh today. So with that said, we'll start with Dr. Gumilang, but before that, I'd just like to say, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chats. We'll have 10 to 12 minutes for each presentation, and in the end, we'll have a question and answer session. Ms. Gumilang, if you'd like to start, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maryam. Thank you so much, Dr. Maryam, for the introduction, and Tobacco Economics for the opportunity to present our research entitled The Effects of Tobacco Farming on Household Income, Evidence from a Three-Wave Tobacco Farmer Survey. So in this study, we extend a recently published paper in the Tobacco Control with extended data incorporating the Wave 3 Tobacco Farmer Survey completed at the beginning of 2020. So the talk will be structured as following, and we will start with the motivation of our study. So progressive tobacco control policies can reduce the burden of tobacco use on the economy. Those who oppose such policies argue that they will have adverse effects on the livelihood of workers in the tobacco sector, particularly tobacco farmers. Existing studies in different country settings provide robust evidence against this simplistic narrative. However, to date, we know very little about the effects of tobacco farming on farmers' income in general, and we also know very little about the livelihood of former tobacco farmers in comparison to current tobacco farmers. Thus, in this study, we aim to first analyze the difference in the farming household's income between current and former tobacco farmers. And second, we would like to estimate the effect of tobacco farming on farming household income. So to answer the research questions, we conducted 3 waves of the tobacco farmer survey. So the first wave was conducted back in 2016, and then the second wave was conducted in 2017, and then the last wave was conducted between December 2019 and then January 2020. So for this tobacco farmer survey, we purposefully select East Java, Central Java, and West Nusa Tenggara Barat, West Nusa Tenggara, the top 3 main producers of tobacco in Indonesia. We interviewed a total of 1950 current and former tobacco farmers in the first wave. And then for the second and third wave, we revisited and re-interviewed about 660 current and former tobacco farmers. And so the sample is representative of top producing regions in Indonesia, and we obtained a panel data of 660 current and former tobacco farmers within the 3-wave survey. And so this is where we conducted our survey. We have several regions in East Java. We also have several regions in Central Java, and this is the focus of the panel data from which we derive our analysis. So first, we're gonna show you the differences in income between the current and former tobacco farmers, and we'd like to dig deep why there are variation in the income across tobacco and current tobacco farmers across years. So the median tobacco farmer's income is relatively more volatile. So if you can see in the first wave, they experience losses. So in this year, this is referred to as the bad year, which will be explained later, but they made profits in the good years. In contrast, the median former tobacco farmers made profit consistently across years. So the more stable household income of former tobacco farmers can be explained, among others, by the diverse income portfolio, particularly from non-agricultural wages and other income. We also find that consistently across years, tobacco farmers incurred higher agricultural input costs per hectare than former tobacco farmers. And the differences in agricultural input costs per hectare borne by current and former tobacco farmers were quite large. For example, in wave 3, tobacco farmers spent about 6 million rupiah per hectare for tobacco crops, while former tobacco farmers spent less than 1 million rupiah for non-tobacco crops. And this pattern is remarkably consistent across years. So high input cost is one of the explanation why about a quarter of tobacco farmers reported needing loans for the tobacco farming inputs. We also find that tobacco households bore significantly higher cost of household labor, which implies significant opportunity costs as household members could have participated in other viable economic opportunities. So since tobacco farming is a much more labor-intensive endeavor than non-tobacco farming, we see, for example, in wave 3, a typical or median tobacco farming household, they spend about 1,363 hours per hectare per year for tobacco farming. However, in contrast, a typical former tobacco farming household only spent about 252 hours per hectare for non-tobacco farming. So it's almost 1/6 of what the tobacco farmers spend in the field per year. So this suggests that tobacco farming households bear significantly larger household labor costs. Note that tobacco farmers in general do not include household labor costs in the calculation of income, and therefore they tend to overestimate their income from tobacco farming. So why do we see dynamics across years? So we see there's a good year in the wave 1, there's a bad year in the wave 1 where tobacco farmers experience losses, but then we have the good year in wave 2 and wave 3 where tobacco farmers, the typical tobacco farmers experience profit, but non-tobacco farmers also receive better income. Weather is one of the explanations for better farming outcomes. So in 2016, the amount of rainfall in the tobacco season was significantly higher than the long-run average, and tobacco quality is quite dependent on drier conditions, particularly during the pre-harvest period. Now, higher than average rainfall is one of the factors that adversely affect leaf production, quality, and then eventually price. On the other hand, in 2017 and 2018, the amount of rainfall in the tobacco season was quite close to the long run average, which is quite ideal, not only for tobacco farming, but also for non-tobacco commodities, such as, for example, chilies and other crops that are grown by tobacco as well as former tobacco farmer. And so this is the dynamic that we see across wave in terms of the income of former tobacco farmers as well as current tobacco farmers. So the next discussion is on the estimation strategy to identify the effect of tobacco farming on household income. So the base specification to estimate the effect of tobacco farming on household income is the following. So we would like to see, the effect of tobacco, which is the share of a household's land dedicated for tobacco farming on total household income per hectare of farming land. And we control for household characteristics. We also control for district fixed effects and then a time fixed effect as well. Now, the term A indicates farmer-specific unobserved characteristic, while the term U indicates idiosyncratic shocks that this farmers face. Now, in general, we would like to use the random effect model. However, one very strong assumption is that there is no correlation between the farmer-specific unobserved characteristics with the amount of land that is dedicated to tobacco. And it's very difficult to fulfill the no correlation assumption so that we get a consistent estimate on the effect of tobacco farming. So this assumption suggests that the choice of tobacco farming is not related to farmers' unobserved characteristics, such as knowledge, information, and farming skills. This assumption is rather difficult to fulfill because unobserved farmer characteristics can be correlated with the farming portfolio in many different ways. So to mediate the endogeneity issue of tobacco, we use an instrumental variable approach. We use the rainfall shocks in the previous tobacco season, April to September, as the instrumental variable for the farming portfolio. So let rain deviation be the standardized deviation from the long run rainfall. So we have the first stage equation for the instrumental variable approach. So the instrument is basically inspired by findings from our qualitative study. Farmers do not predict high rainfall shocks 2 years in a row. Thus, a rainfall shock this year will be followed by a normal weather in the next year, which supposedly to be relatively good for tobacco farming and farming in general. So rainfall shock is positively associated with higher share of tobacco farming in the subsequent year. So this is just a brief discussion on the main assumptions of the instrumental variable. Basically, we have the endogenous variable, how much land is dedicated for tobacco farming within each tobacco household. But there are also farmer-specific unobserved characteristics that also affect the household income. And this unobserved characteristic could be correlated with tobacco farming, and so tobacco farming is an endogenous variable. So we'd like to find an instrument, in this case, rainfall shocks in the previous period, that is not correlated with the unobservable. However, it's also not directly correlated to the household income, but it's correlated with the endogenous variable, which is the land dedicated for tobacco farming. So we find a strong evidence that rainfall shock in the previous period is a significant predictor. It has a significant correlation with the amount of land dedicated for tobacco farming in the current tobacco farming season. So farmers expected good weather for tobacco farming after a year of positive rainfall shock, which is higher than average rainfall. One standard deviation of rainfall deviation from the long run average was associated with a higher share of land by 15.20 percentage point, which is relatively high. And this is the main estimate of the analysis. You can focus on the last column, which is column E. So the results suggest that a 1 percentage point increase in the share of land for tobacco farming reduces income by about 782.5 per hectare. Now, for a median tobacco farmer with a quarter hectare of land, 1 percentage point in the share of land for tobacco farming would reduce profit by almost $200. So indeed, tobacco farming has negative effects on household income, and this result is quite the contrary to the industry's narrative that tobacco farming is much more prosperous agricultural endeavor. So first, while tobacco farming and crop farming both depended on the weather, crop farming generated higher household income than tobacco farming regardless of the weather. Second, farmers incurred significantly higher household labor costs from tobacco farming compared to non-tobacco farming, implying that non-tobacco households could reallocate their labor resources for other fruitful economic opportunities, including those off-farm. This dynamic suggests strongly that farming non-tobacco crops is a viable alternative livelihood for tobacco farming households. So we'd like to discuss briefly the policy implications. Our results show that quite the opposite of the narrative. Decreasing the share of tobacco crops in a farmer's farming portfolio would likely to raise their income. The clear policy recommendation will be to encourage farmers to strengthen non-tobacco crops in their farming portfolio. And the government of Indonesia can use the DPH CHT funds to help tobacco farmers to transition to non-tobacco crops. And lastly, finally, the findings suggest that decreases in tobacco in a farmer's crop portfolio generate greater overall household income, suggesting strongly that the FCTC Article 17 is likely a prosperity enhancing provision. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope I didn't get overboard on the time. Back to you, Dr. Maryam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gumilang. Actually, we have a couple of questions from Dr. Chaloupka, and I think I can ask them now. So the first question is, why do the costs of household labors decline so sharply over the 3 waves? And it was about the graph that you had showed.
Exactly. Yes. So one of the potential explanations is that there were a lot of labor-intensive work for tobacco farmers, particularly in the first wave. So the weather was not relatively suitable for tobacco farming. It was relatively wet during the period close to harvest and then the harvest period, and so there were a lot of efforts given to the tobacco for tending, making sure that there is no excess moisture in the leaf, and then also during the processing of the harvested tobacco. So that's one of the explanations why there was significantly much labor, imputed for the first wave tobacco farming.
And so Violeta has a question, do former farmers use 100% of their labor effort on farming?
No, actually, we find that former tobacco farmers, they have a very, dynamic income portfolio. They don't necessarily spend their 100% of their labor effort on farming. They also spend it for wage income, for example. They also spend their resources for non-agriculture businesses, as well as agricultural related businesses. So this is the main difference between tobacco farmers and former tobacco farmer. They have a more diverse income portfolio, and they don't necessarily put their efforts on tobacco, on farming and tobacco farming in particular. So in contrast, tobacco farmers, they mainly rely on tobacco farming, and then farming in general. I think it consists about 90% of their total income.
So what other crops do farmers substitute for tobacco?
Yeah, very interesting question. So we conducted the survey, and then in the survey, we asked the type of crops that were grown in the dry season as well as in the wet season. So in general, in the dry season, a lot of the farmers, they farm chili, for example, and also corn. And then in the wet season, usually they farm paddy, for example.
And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's also other crops such as green vegetables and then fruits, but corn, chilies, and then paddy are one of the most of the cited crops that they grown outside of tobacco.
And do you see former tobacco farmers, do you see them having a similar portfolio before they quit tobacco?
That's actually a very interesting question, Violeta. I think that's something that we haven't explored much recently. But yes, I think one interesting thing that we can do is that trying to track their status over time. We do see that farmers coming back to tobacco after exits from tobacco farming. There are tobacco farmers who switch out of tobacco and then go fully non-tobacco farming. I think it's a very interesting question to identify the shift in the share of tobacco farmers to former tobacco farmers. For former tobacco farmers that quit tobacco farming entirely, we do see that significant shift toward non-farming income. However, for former tobacco farmers who has a probability of going back to tobacco farming, perhaps they still rely on tobacco farming and farming in general. But that's something that we'll definitely look into when we do some analysis in the future. And thank you for the question.
Just one last question. What about the coordination patterns between farmers and leaf buyers in Indonesia?
Yeah. So we have I think a quite interesting finding in the sense that tobacco farmers, one of the reasons why tobacco farmers want to quit tobacco farming is the low price that they receive. So one of the explanations of the low price received by tobacco farmers is because they don't have necessarily a good bargaining power with the buyers of the leaf. And then a lot of the buyers of the leaf are middlemen. Here we call it the tengkulak. And basically they're channeling the tobacco leaves directly into the warehouse, tobacco industry warehouse. So they don't necessarily have good bargaining power against this buyer. And so what we see is that they receive relatively lower price for the tobacco, regardless of the quality of the tobacco. We also see that there are contract and independent farmers. That's something that we also explore in the report. We don't necessarily see that there is a significant difference in the price received between the independent and the contract farmers, but that's also another way that tobacco farmers channel their tobacco into the industry.
Thank you, Dr. Gilan. So I think we'll move on to our next presentation. And if you have time, we'll come back to any questions that we have for the panelists. So if you're ready, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Maryam. So first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Maryam for, and the tobacco economics in UIC giving us this opportunity to present our research paper. The title is Tobacco Taxation and Brand Switching Behavior, and a discrete choice experiment in Vietnam. The outline of my presentation is first we discuss the motivations why we are focusing on the switching behavior, and then we move on to our discussion of the discrete choice experiment we run to estimate the switching behavior. Then we present our results, and then the presentation will conclude with some policy discussions. Basically, the motivation of our research paper centered around the recent discussion of the Ministry of Finance proposal to increase the tax by imposing a specific tax component to its purely ad valorem tax systems. So that's the motivation. So but before that, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the tobacco consumption in Vietnam. So like many other countries in the region, Vietnam has a high level of tobacco consumption, and the government strategies on tobacco control set a target to reduce the current level of smoking prevalence from 45.3 to 39% by 2020. We are now in the 2021, and according to some recent estimates, the government seems to have not reached the target imposed by itself. The problems of high prevalence, high smoking prevalence in Vietnam is attributable to the, in part, significant part is due to the low tobacco taxations in the countries. So in Vietnam, the tobaccos, the cigarettes are subject to three different types of taxes: the excise tax, the tobacco control fund contribution, and the value-added tax. So together, the total tax on cigarettes add up to about 84.7% of the ex-factory price. But this is equivalent to less than 40% of the retail price, and obviously it is lower than the recommended level by the WHO as well by the World Bank. So recently, the government of Vietnam, especially the Ministry of Finance, has been considering a kind of moving towards a mixed excise tax system, and they are considering to add some specific component to the current effluent tax. So the tax has not been submitted to the government yet, but it has been discussed. And the Ministry of Finance initially proposed 1,000 Vietnamese dong, and which is very small amount back in 2017. But later on, there's been some, circulation of the discussion that maybe the appropriate level, maybe 2,000 Vietnamese dong, and the WHO head of the WHO country office in Vietnam recommend that Vietnam should consider 5,000 Vietnamese dong to be added to the carbon tax, excise tax. So this is the situation is purely hypothetical. What would happen when the price of cigarette increase due to the change in due to the imposition of a specific tax? So our research tried to estimate what would happen if the government introduced the specific component tax in Vietnam. So we will consider on three levels that has been under discussion by the Ministry of Finance: 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000, as I just mentioned. So basically, the research question we would like to address are interrelated. So we would like to know to what extent the proposed tax will reduce the cigarette. This is because when the tax induce the cigarette induce the price increase, some people may switch between cigarette brands from the higher price brand to a lower price brand, or they may even switch to some illicit products. In Vietnam, we also have a problem because there's some pushback by the tobacco industries, because there's some worries, there's some concern that some of the brands owned by the SOEs will be affected by the tax increase, because the SOEs in Vietnam mostly produce a large number of brands in the lower price segment. Are you okay with my screen? Or
Yes, we can see your screen.
do you want the full screen, or is that still okay?
Sure. If you can do full screen, that would be great.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Also, you have 6 minutes left.
Okay, don't worry. So because of the nature of the research questions, that we don't have a kind of real policy changes yet. So we have to the appropriate method is to use a method called district choice experiment. So this is what we do in our research. So the district choice experiment is basically a hypothetical. It's basically a method to ask hypothetical scenarios And in our case, the scenario will be the different cigarette brands. And then we introduce different price for different brands that reflect the proposed change in the price, proposed change in the tax specific component discussed by the Ministry of Finance. So in total, we have 15 brands in 3 regions of the countries, and the brand included in our experiment account for more than 70% of the total tobacco consumption, and it represents also the entire price spectrums. We make assumption that we have the complete pass-through. That is, the experimental price will be the current price plus the specific tax rate that we discussed about 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. And here is an examples of the a scenario that we presented to a survey respondent to answers. So the respondent may pick one of the brands, and then they can either choose one of the brand or they can choose none of these. So here's another example. And we run this together with a general survey that we collected information on their current assumptions as well as their demographics, so that we can use this information for the simulation at the later stage. So we have basically run 3 simulations with different assumptions. The first one is to assume that the 100 pass-through rate for the licit products and the price of illicit products is not affected. The second scenario is 100% pass-through for the licit, but the price of the illicit cigarette increased by 50% of the tax increase. And the third scenario is that the pass-through rate is 80% for the lower price licit brand and 100% for the high price licit brand, but the price of the illicit cigarette remain unchanged. So we run the survey in 3 regions. We have 1,100 and 1,200 respondents across the countries. So basically, we are doing kind of a representative sample survey with cluster stratified random sampling. Once we collected the data, we run the random DEPOCEN logit model, or another name is mixed logit models. From this model, we can estimate different price increases, and then we included in the model also the interaction between the brand price with the demographics. So from the estimate, from the parameter estimation, we can then estimate something called the price elasticities. So we can estimate the own price elasticity and semi cross price elasticities. So the own price elasticities of the brands included in our experiment is presented in this table. As you can see, we have 15 brands together, and they are classified into lower and higher tiers. And then and we did it for 3 regions. So as you can see here, the lower price brands in the second from the right, the lower price band generally have a higher own price elasticity than the high price band. This implies that the smokers of the lower price band are more responsive to the change in the tax, or in the price and in the tax increases. The last overall elasticities we estimated for all of the 15 brands, and we do the kind of average. It suggests that our estimate is more or less in line with the previous studies. The own price elasticities will reflect how the price of a certain brand will change with respect to the price increase. But we're also interested in the behavior that some people may switch from from certain brand to another. So we estimate something called quasi something cross price semi elasticities. So in these tables, we can estimate the switching or the tendency to switch between different brands to other brands. So the implication of this estimation is that the lower price cigarette brands are more sensitive to change in the price of another low price brand rather than to the changes in the higher price one. So it makes sense because that the consumer will switch between the low in the same price segments. We use the cost price as well as own price elasticities to do some simulation for own brand in the country to estimate how their market share change. So here we estimate three different scenarios. The first different scenario on the left, you can see a different scenario, three different scenario, and the column reflect different specific tax rate that considered by the Ministry of Finance at the moment. So the first thing we notice is that the lower price brands are being affected more than the high price brands. And the second is that some smoker may quit while others may switch to illicit. And this happened mostly in the southern part of the countries for two brands, that is Jet and Hero. The third one is the higher specific tax, the higher the quitting rate and the lower the smoking prevalence. And the different pass-through scenario rate may result in different impact. And at the moment, we haven't done the pass-through estimation yet because there's no estimate available. So we make up these assumptions. But this we notice that this assumption will affect the estimations. And we also consider how or whether the specific tax rate proposed by the Ministry of Finance will help Vietnam to meet the target of the national strategy on tobacco controls. In own scenario and under even at the highest specific components, Vietnam may not be able to reach its target for 2020s. Finally, I'd like to note some policy implication. The first one is that by imposing the specific excise tax, we incentivize the smoker, particularly smoker lower price brand, to stop smoking. We would like to also note that they are the smoker of low price brand are typically low income earner. So in this case, the tax tobacco tax are progressive. And as you have just seen in the last slide, even if the high increase of the specific component of 5 Vietnamese thousand dong recommended by the WHO may not help Vietnam to, even though it helped Vietnam to reduce the smoking prevalence, but may not help Vietnam to reach the target. So we urge the government of Vietnam to consider even a higher tax rate and maybe regularly to adjust the tax rate to account for inflation and income growth. So the final point is that raising the tobacco excise tax will be more effective in reducing smoking prevalence, especially in the south of Vietnam, if the government have a proper control against cigarette smuggling. So thank you, Maryam. That's after my presentation.
Thank you, An. So in the interest of time, I'd like to invite Wasim Saleem from SPDC. An, if you could stop your screen share and
yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Wasim.
Thank you, Maryam. This research is carried out by the SPDC, Social Policy and Development Center, and the research was funded by the University of Illinois Chicago Institute for Health Research and Policy Um, in case of Pakistan, the tobacco industry in Pakistan is around $2 billion industry market size, and the average production is around 60%, and owned by 95% of the market is owned by the two companies, Pakistan Tobacco Company and Philip Morris. And like other countries, we also have a federal excise duty in specific mode and general sales tax in VAT mode, and both are collected at a production stage. So, although they are applied on the retail prices, but government is collecting at the production stage uh, due to relatively large undocumented sales in the economy of the due to the informal sector, relatively large informal sector, and this is a general practice for all the sectors in the economy. Federal Board of Revenue is the main entity and responsible who is responsible to collecting the tax from in the country, but unfortunately, because of having a tax at production stage, there is and FBR has no way to get any information about the uh, overall production by the industry. We don't have any trace and track and trace system, and we don't have any specific excise stamps to monitor or evaluate the tax liabilities of the firm. Most of the illicit trade studies has used uh, pack empty pack method to estimate the extent of illicit trade, but because of absence due to absence of tax specific excise tax stamps or TNT system, it's very difficult to find out the counterfeit even or undeclared production by the industry. So it's not possible to identify that even a pack, if it is fulfill all the criterias of licit trade, but still it's a duty has been paid on it or not. So um, uh, just before discussing the objective of the study, if you just look at the production, to give you an idea that main reason for and motivation for this kind of research, we have witnessed in 2015, 16 and 16, 17 a sharp decline in the production of the industry, and the decline is around 14.6 and 35.8 respectively in 2015, 16 and 16, 17. And this at that time, the if you just look at the effective excise duty collection, it was on a rise since 2016-17. And in Pakistan, the industry, because we don't have any mechanism to monitor the production of the industry, and they claim that their production has gone down because the illicit trade increase in tax rate leads to a higher price differential between licit and illicit trade, and allows household consumers and smokers to switch from licit towards illicit trade, and it put a pressure on FBR because their revenues, if you just look at 2016-17 number, it has fallen to 66.3 billion, which is a decline of 27%, put a pressure on FBR, and they have introduced a third tier and reduced the tax rate. So the effective excise duty has decreased by 41% in 1 year. But what happened is that, and the industry's argument and FBR's projection was that decrease in effective excise duty will lead to broaden the tax base, and so the tax revenue will increase, but it didn't happen. The only thing that happened is that firms production has recovered back to 59 billion, which is on an average and very close to the average number, but the excise duty has only increased by 1.2%, 67 billion. So it puts a some it seems a dubious kind of relationship by and behavior of industry, that in one particular year there is a sharp decline in the production, and production has recovered back, but the revenues, FBR's revenues has gone down. But on another side, why it's dubious, that if we look at the profit margins of the firms, it was on a rise. Even if their production has decreased, their profit margin for both companies was on a rise during that time. So given that and the existing limitation of the other illicit trade studies, we have decided to estimate the potential level of output by the industry, tobacco industry, legitimate industry, and to estimate the extent of underreporting of the cigarette production, and to find out a way in the absence of TNT system to monitor the production and identify their tax liability of the tobacco industry in Pakistan. So for that, we have used multiple approaches and econometric methods to and different data sources to find out the robustness of the estimates. So we have used supply functions, and we have also developed the production functions. So these are the four models that we have estimated. We have used the annual data on the production and the price, market price relationships to find out the annual supply function. Then we have the production information and the price information at a monthly level. So we have used that to find out the seasonality in production. Then the production function in time series. We have uses the financial data set of these two companies to monitor to look at the relationship between input and output in the country. And then we have estimated the also by using panel data for these two companies. We have constructed a fixed effect. We have estimated a fixed effect model to estimate the relationship and controlling for the firm specific heterogeneities. But one of the major limitation of using financial data set, if there is any underreporting in the inputs by the firm in their financial statements, so there is no other way to map or match or estimate the extent of underreporting in the inputs. So these are the theoretical framework, and these are the regression results. In case of annual time series production function, we have found out a quadratic relationship between prices and output of the firm. In case of monthly time series supply function, what we have found very interesting is that there is a problem of front loading, that in Pakistan we have budget has been announced and changes in tax rates occurred in June. And if you just look at the firm's production relationship, we found that there is a significant increase in the production in the first 5 months of every year, from January till May. And since after June, there is a significant decrease in the production of a firm's industry's production. It gives an idea that once if the firm have any information about the tax changes, they increase their production. As I mentioned earlier, we are collecting excise duty at a production stage. It enables firm to evade taxes in a way that they produce before changes in the tax, and after changes in tax they have significantly reduced their production and sell those packs at a previous excise duty, but charge the existing prices in the available at that time in the market. And in case of production function, we have used a standard Cobb-Douglas production function approach to estimate the relationship between input and output. And this is the model for the financial time series, and this is for the financial panel data. And what we have done, that we have estimated the data model for till 2016, and then plug back those values for 2016-17 and 17-18 into the model to get the estimated output. So what we have found, that all the four models has shown a significant extent of underreporting in the production, which is around, in case of 2016-17, there was 71% extent of underreporting as per annual time series model, and the monthly time series, which allows for seasonality and shows a 47% extent of underreporting in one particular year. And then in 2017-18, it was around 22.8 and 26.5 respectively in case of annual time series and monthly time series model. In case of financial data, the pattern is more or less same. That in 2017, one clarification here: in case of supply functions, we have used this. The data is for financial uh, fiscal year, which started from July till June. And in case of financial data sets, we the time year started from January till December, the regular financial data year. So the comparison between these two, the extent of underreporting in supply function and financial data set, financial data is not possible in that way. But what is more important, that all the four models has shown a significant extent of underreporting, and the pattern that in 2016-17 and 2017 was a relatively higher extent of underreporting, and in 2017-18 there was a slight decrease, as I've shown in very first slide on the production, that the production of the industry has recovered back to the 59 billion, but still there was 26.5 billion, 26.5% extent of underreporting, as uh, highlighted by the monthly supply function, and 21% in case of panel financial data set. So based on these models, we have found that there is a pattern in extent of underreporting, and there is a presence of underreporting. So it requires a strict monitoring of the supply chain of tobacco industry. And we have carried out this research in 2019, and after advocating, I can take my our organization can take a little responsibility of that, that this year, from the 1st July 2021, the government has implemented TNT system on tobacco industry in Pakistan, just to monitor their production. Thank you so much. I hope I'm in time.
Thank you, Wasim. So we actually only have 3 minutes left the session. If anyone has any questions, please ask. I think we'll skip the last presentation. So I don't see any questions. Then I guess then I have 2 minutes and I can just share what I was presenting, and maybe you could look at it later when this is out. I've been working on analyzing the poverty estimates from Pakistan and Bangladesh. And the idea, basically, the link between tobacco use and poverty is such that a lot of people do not have the knowledge or have an understanding of how tobacco use could be leading to an increase in their poverty or in their resource constraints. And basically, the idea is that there are three major channels that would lead to that. The income, one is foregone income from tobacco purchases, meaning that as we are spending more on tobacco, that is taking away the amount that is spent on basic needs such as food, education, and health, and crowding out work both from Pakistan and Bangladesh has shown that that is certainly happening. In addition to that, tobacco use also causes sickness and health concerns. All the medical expenditures that are directly related to our tobacco, that are directly related to tobacco use also reduce our income, in addition to our reduced productivity and income earning potential. And then another channel that is often ignored is that tobacco consumption may also lead to premature death, resulting in loss of future earnings for the main members of the households, which then affects the family welfare. And typically, the estimates that a government has been using for poverty does not include these additional impacts. The work that I've been doing has been to introduce or to basically account for the impact that tobacco use could be having on poverty. So basically, and I find that as changes, after accounting for tobacco purchases and tobacco-related health expenditures, there's a 22% increase in the national poverty estimate, which is the health count ratio in Pakistan. And then similarly in Bangladesh, I find that there's about a 48% increase. And the idea is that the tobacco use in poor households exacerbates poverty by increasing the healthcare costs, reducing income, and decreasing productivity by diverting the limited resources that families have from basic needs. There are certain limitations for the research, which I'll go into when this work is released. But I'd like to just thank everyone for joining the session, and I apologize for all the technical issues and for my confusion as I had to chair the session. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to all panelists for sharing their work and for great presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.